David, thank you very much for joining me for this interview. Really pleasure to meet with
Thanks
you.
for the invite.
Finally, I have enjoyed very much reading about your work and going through your videos and material that is online.
Hmm.
What I would like to do in this interview is actually getting to know the author rather than the work of the author. And then I would like to get some more information about your latest book because it's about to come out.
Hmm.
But before we will talk about your work, I really would like to learn about yourself.
Hmm.
So, how and with which lodge did your Masonic journey start?
Well, I was going way back. That's about 1998, and I joined a lodge called Donville Lodge, which met in well, still meets in a pub in a village called Lymm in Cheshire, which was a great little place, nice little pub called the Spread Eagle. And we met upstairs. So it was pretty old fashioned, going back to the 18th and 19th century. And obviously, when I walked in, I'd just finished my history degree by that time, come back to Warrington, settled down a bit. And as soon as I walked in the lodge, the blindfold came off, all that kind of stuff. The first thing that hit me was that it was like going back in time. Very kind of Victorian or Edwardian. And they all their particular dress code was like evening dress, So it had the bow ties and the dinner jackets and so it added that little bit of Victoriana to it, in a way, and it was good, really enjoyed that lodge.
Did you find them or they found you?
Well, I was seeing a girl at the time. Whose father was worshipful master at the time, and
Oh,
so he kind of dropped a few hints. Oh, you're into history, you might like this, and I think it went to a couple of ladies' evenings or something like that, or a ladies' evening and then another summer social or something, and it was quite good, there was a few guys kind of my age that was around there, and it was good, and so I ended up kind of joining, and it fascinated me really. The ritual, where the ritual came from, the history of it, because none of the guys in the lodge knew much about the history of Freemasonry or knew much about the history of the lodge. Really, it was strange. So that's what got me onto the history thing. And as I said, I'd just done a history degree, just finished a history degree, so um, got really into it, and so the next thing.
At the time you were performing emulation or Taylor, or what sort of ritual were you performing back then?
The ritual for that lodge, I'm not sure. I think it was emulation. Yeah, it was just yeah, with a few little quirks, and yeah, it was good. Really enjoyed it. I was there for a few years, and I think I was there for about 4 years, and then I ended up moving to Liverpool because I was doing a PhD. I got offered to do a PhD, and obviously that was in the history of Freemasonry. So by that time, I'd become quite really into the history of things, and I was being passed books and all kinds of different things, and that just got me into it.
Are you today a member of a Masonic lodge in the craft? And are you also a member of any higher degrees, Royal Arch, Mark Mariner, Scottish Rite, or Ancient and Accepted Rite?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still a member of a lodge. Yeah, I when I went to Liverpool, I joined a Liverpool lodge because obviously that was easy. I couldn't make it back to the lodge in Lymm because the traffic was that bad. It met on a Friday night, which was a bit dodgy. And then so I joined a lodge in Liverpool that met in Woolton Hall, of all places. That's right on the edge of Liverpool, little village right on the edge of Liverpool. So I met there for a while, and then I moved back to Warrington eventually, where I live now, and I joined a lodge in Warrington. Probably about
As craft.
Craft Lodge. Yeah, about 8 years ago, maybe
Well,
8 or 9 years ago. Yeah, and joined that one, the Lodge of Lights, it's called, and very old lodge. It was formed in 1765, and so I was thinking about going back to Donville Lodge, the original lodge that I was a member of.
Yeah.
And the way it worked out, I'd given a talk for the Lodge of Lights, and they said, "Oh, you want to join it? If you're into history, this is the place." So I joined that, and I was in the chair about 3 or 4 years ago. So I'm a member of chapter, Royal Arch, SRIA. I joined those a few years ago.
Yeah.
Didn't want to join, too many things. I would love to join everything, really. When you think about it, the Mark, and I've always fancied joining the Mark, but it's time as well.
I agree with you, David. Historian before a Mason. Start your journey. Learn the ritual. You've been past master, so it means that you went through the ladder. You have seen the temple from all the different cardinal points. And yet you were with brethren that were just performing a ritual, while you, as historian, had a different drive. How did change your view into Freemasonry? Did it change your view in Freemasonry?
Oh yeah. You discover all kinds of different things, the good and the bad. One of the things that I was always interested in was the way that Freemasons fell out, and the rebellions, the Liverpool Masonic Rebellion was one of my that's right, became one of my books, my third book, I think, and probably one of my most enjoyable areas of research, because it was local as well, and it was great just to dive into that kind of Dickensian era, early 19th century, 1823 time, when they launched or relaunched the Ancients, as it were, and the whole story, which was fascinating, how it moved to Wigan, another northern town, and became the Grand Lodge held at Wigan, and lasted till 1913. Very, very, rich story of independent Freemasonry. The York Grand Lodge was another one as well. And for me, it was interesting how Freemasons fall out with each other over various different things. It could be ego, could be things that we've all. If you're a Freemason, you've experienced this. You've seen it happen, and people from the outside think that all Freemasons are all in it together and rule the world and all this kind of rubbish, but really they don't know half of what goes on. It's like
like in the movies, power, ego, politics.
Yes, exactly. So I wanted to write about that, really, and the Liverpool Masonic Rebellion came out of that, really. The York Grand Lodge as well came out of that. My recent book, the book that I'm doing now, The Rite of 7 Degrees, which is about Pierre Lambert de Lintot, and his kind of independent form of Freemasonry, esoteric rites that he was performing in London in the later 18th century, fascinating stuff. That's one theme. And then the social theme as well, there's a social theme there that runs through my work. That captivated me, really. How Freemasons were donating to charity and founding schools and colleges and libraries, churches, all kinds of things in the 19th century.
The life in the community.
Exactly. Yeah.
David, studying Freemasonry, being an historian, you actually need not just to write about somebody, but understand the psychology of somebody. You write about Ashmole, you write about Desiree, sorry, my pronunciation. And these characters are very strong characters. And like you just said, I mean, there was falling out, there was confrontations, etc.
Mm.
Which character impressed you the most before you knew him and after you studied it? I mean, give me an idea of who impressed you.
Quite a lot of them, really. I mean, Elias Ashmole, fascinating character, royalist in the war, in the Civil War, 1640s. He was an alchemist. He was dabbling in all kinds of, kind of magical summoning of spirits, John Dee style. Forward with that, and got involved with politics later on. He rebelled against the rebels eventually. He kind of left the the rebel Grand Lodge, if you like, and he ended up very clever man. He was into cartography and designed this beautiful map of Liverpool, the first, probably the first accurate map of Liverpool. I think it was 1836. It's a beautiful map. It's on display in the Liverpool Museum, and he got involved in politics, in local politics, which was a bad decision because I think his temper and his and his aggressive nature, and he went round kind of gathering fake signatures for for a petition, and ended up in jail.
Okay.
But yeah, fascinating character. I mean, there's so many of them, really.
No, I believe it. And going through the different books, and like you're saying, the different period. I mean,
Richard Carlisle is another one. Richard Carlisle, who is the focus of my last book, The Rediscovered Rituals. That book was really a veiled Masonic biography of Richard Carlisle. I've always liked Richard Carlisle's career and his work. He was a very early 19th century, very kind of aggressive radical, really. He was at the Peterloo Massacre in 1819 in Manchester. He wrote about that. He landed in jail as well. He basically put together the Manual of Freemasonry, which is a fantastic collection of rituals. So that Rediscovered Rituals book was all about that, examining his life, his influences in a Masonic context, because he wasn't a Mason, but he was so involved in it and putting together all these high degrees. It's a beautiful book. I've always managed to sneak in some Carlisle ritual somewhere, because I admire him that much, and Pierre Lambert de Lintot, who's the focus of my latest book. I mean, he, again, fascinating character, engraver, esoteric ritualist, fantastic person. I mean, he was, he was basically in charge of this rite of 7 degrees that was being performed in London, and above a pub somewhere in London, and inviting all these members of the aristocracy in there, so yeah, there's been some really rich characters involved in Freemasonry over the years.
Yeah, I really can imagine, and you describe them very well in your books, David.
Thank you.
My view, and that's a personal view, so it's debatable, but David, an historian going through the books, going through the profile, creating a psychological profile, creating a social profile of all these characters, make you, as a surgeon, I mean, we look in a person, we see the smile, the eyes, etc. But in reality, it's flesh, muscles, blood, and and bones,
Mm.
and that somehow takes away the magic of what we look at. What does inspire you still today in Freemasonry? I mean, the ritual, the spirituality, the camaraderie. What does make you still, have such an interest in Freemasonry today?
That's a good question, really. I think for me, it's mainly the spiritual pathway that's there, and that really isn't advertised much. I mean, it's kind of something that seems a bit weird. So they kind of put it away in a box, and I think one of the grand officers of the United Grand Lodge of England did a talk or published an article a few years ago where he said, "Oh, there's no spirituality in Freemasonry," which is wrong, really, because it's all spiritual, really. There's a spiritual essence in there, from understanding the ritual and understanding the symbolism, the Masonic story, as I've mentioned in my last book, The Rediscovered Rituals, how the Masonic story kind of unfolds, and how it kind of embraces these themes that push it forward. It's a collection of dramas, sequels, and prequels, and it's a beautiful story that's got a spiritual message. And I think that esoteric essence of it, if that was put forward more, then it would attract more members, more younger members that are looking for that kind of spiritual pathway or spiritual development, and also these conspiracy nuts that kind of say, like, oh yeah, Freemasonry, you want to rule the world, Illuminati, whatever.
Yeah.
That would break that as well. That would.
I totally agree with you. What I find fascinating is that we enter into a temple where on top of it is written "Know thyself." I mean, the pure meaning of entering into a temple is to start working on your own self, where you start seeking into perfection. Perfecting yourself is step one. I totally understand what you're saying. It's still fascinating. Spirituality. Allow me to elaborate on what you just said, David. Spirituality, it's something that is at the same time very personal, because we don't all look at the spirituality in the same way, depending on your cultural background, your history, where you come from, the type of things that inspire you, your family, and so on. And yet, being part of a community, it is actually a broader sense. And what I find I'm actually very interested in when you say spirituality is looking into your development. 2009, when you wrote your thesis on that became your first book. 2009.
That's when it was. Well, it was completed in 2007. I started in 2000. I did it part time over 7 years because I was lecturing at the same time.
To look at that path, in the path that you did, I mean, I can understand the history part, but usually we are touched by the people we talk to and people that give us some emotions close to us. Is there a particular moment where spirituality came towards you and you start realizing, actually, you know what, Freemasonry is not just characters and past and just people that are repeating a ritual, but this person made me think something different, and there you start exploring more and more your spirituality within the Freemasonry path. Was there a moment?
There's probably been a few, really. Yeah. One of the let's try and think about probably the last moment I would think would be when I was in the chair, maybe. Because that was when I was researching, I think, or maybe just finishing my book that was called The Lost Rites and Rituals of Freemasonry, which was probably one of my most enjoyable books to research and write about. And that opened up a lot of doorways, because it was looking at other rites, esoteric rites that were in the continent in the 18th century, like the rite of strict observance and Meliseno's rite and Cagliostro's Egyptian rite and things like that. So I really got into those. Memphis Mizraim and Rite of Zinzendorf and all that kind of stuff. And also some of the Ella Cohen material, and so that got me into that, and that was obviously very, very spiritual. Well, I mean that in itself's like a good question, because it all happened to me by accident, really. So I didn't plan to become a Mason. It just happened by accident. So and that again takes us back to the last question, because it was when you say about spirituality and odd occurrences and things like that, that kind of lead to that, random occurrences.
Yeah.
So like before going to Freemasonry, I was a musician. I was in a band and writing songs, doing gigs, and stuff like that. And that was my main focus, really. The Freemasonry thing just happened, and then the interest in the history aspect of it just happened as well. That just came from nowhere. I can remember the very first time that I went into the lodge, and it was all very Victorian and Edwardian, and that was one of the things that really hit me. It was like going back in time. It was like one of those films, where you get the blindfold ripped off you, and suddenly you've back in time or something. So that was probably one of those moments as well, really. Very it had an impact.
They mark you, those moments.
I think people join for different reasons. I mean, some people join for that aspect of spirituality. They're already aware that is an aspect of it, and they want to tap into that. Others still think along the lines of, oh yeah, I want to join a men's club, and I want to. It might be good for my career, and there are people that that do join because of that. I've witnessed that. I've experienced that.
David, thank you so much. Now we're going to the final question, and it might be a little longer as an answer, because we are going to address your latest book and your latest work. Rite of 7 Degrees, 1800. It's a fascinating time. It's not just for Freemasonry, but the whole society is booming. Classical music, you get all the romanticism that is coming out. You get the structure of society that is getting clearer and clearer, how Europe is going to function and the rest of the world. We have the relationship with the US. Sorry.
Yeah. The Enlightenment, that was...
Precisely.
Yeah.
Can you tell us something about your book? I mean, The Rite of 7 Degrees.
Yeah, well, it's the third book in a series, really, that started off with the Lost Rites and Rituals of Freemasonry about 4 years ago. Yeah, about 4 years ago, when it came out, and it's looking at all these different rites and rituals that took place in mainly the 18th century, early 19th, and but it involves a Frenchman called Pierre Lambert de Lintot, who came over from Normandy in the 1760s, and he settled in London. He was an engraver, and one of the first things that he set up was this Rite of 7 Degrees, and it's a fascinating rite. When I first saw it, I thought, you know, this is amazing. This is great. And we've translated the rituals, which were in 18th century French. So they're now in English. That's going to be part of the book. For the first time, they're going to be published. There's a Masonic biography on Delinto, Lambert Delinto, and also his engravings are in there as well, because he did some beautiful Masonic engravings. So I've got those in there, and there's some of those that's never been published before. And also there's an explanation about each engraving. And that ties up really with his rituals and his life. So it all kind of ties together. And it's probably one of my best books so far, really. It's really proud of it. It's quite a chunky book now. It's about 70,000 words.
Wow.
And, you know, with footnotes and index and bibliography and the usual stuff. And yeah, it's a great book.
You said, and please feel free to stop me if I'm asking you questions that you feel comfortable, not comfortable. You say it's in the book, then I will go in the book. But did he simply translate it literally, the ritual, or did he adapt it to what he was at the time, the rituals that were here in the UK?
No, it was a completely French ritual that he brought over, complete French ritual. It was 7 degrees, and there was some grades that were compacted into, you know, certain degrees. So, and it's one of those rituals that is part of a greater family tree of 7-degree rites, like the rite of strict observance and Melosino's rite and the rite of Zinzendorf, and they were 7-degree rites. But Delinto's has developed from the chapter of Clermont, and it's obviously got its own Masonic story compacted into those 7 degrees, which is fascinating. You get this rich, esoteric, deeply esoteric Masonic story, and it's fascinating, you know. So what Delinto was doing, he was bestowing these degrees on people, you know, both from the ancient Grand Lodge and the modern Grand Lodge. You know, they were coming along. And then he got involved in William Preston's Grand Lodge of England south of the River Trent. So he was with them for 10 years, and it's a fascinating story, you know. So it lasted till the 1790s. You know, he was still at it in the 1790s, and influenced others. And it links on with my last book, because he influenced some of the degrees that Richard Carlisle wrote about in his Manual of Freemasonry. So I basically laid the foundations for it in the previous book, you know. So
develop it here. So
and connected these characters.
Yeah, what Lamboa? You mentioned that. Was he
Lambert Delinto? Lambert Delinto.
Excuse me. Yeah, Delinto. Was he a man in a mission, or he was just caught with the ritual and he started doing something with it? Was it the mission of his life to come to England, introduce the 7 rites and so on?
He was certainly a man on a mission. Yeah, he was. he was an excellent ritualist, and he actually notes down in the minutes, which were translated as well, that if he'd have these kind of lodges of instruction, and if someone didn't do it, he'd actually say incapable, you know, next to their kind of minute entry, you know, this guy's incapable. So he was obviously very into his ritual, and he probably knew it off by heart. And what I saw anyway, and what I photographed from the United Grand Lodge of England, where the ritual book was kept in the minute book, it's all in his handwriting, you know. So it's beautiful stuff, you know.
Brilliant.
Well, yeah, he came over from Normandy in the 1760s, and he was a military man.
Yeah.
Um,
Are these 7 rituals still existing in Normandy or in France?
Sorry, what?
The rite of 7 degrees, is it still existing in Normandy or in France in its original form? Or it
Oh
disappeared
no,
and developed in England?
well, you find with these rituals that there's a lot of development and they evolve, you
Yeah.
know. So, like for example, in France, you do get the traditional French rite, which was 7 degrees. That was a little later, I think. And then in England, you get the Baldwin rite, which still exists, and the Baldwin rite is probably the closest rite to Delinto's rite. You know, there's definitely a relationship there. And indeed, you know, it's like a family tree. You've got to see these rites really as like family trees, you know, because there was a lot of cross pollination. You know, there was members going from one rite to the next and taking ideas, and you know, there's things like that happen.
David, this answer actually leads perfectly to my next question, because that was one of the questions I had about the lost rites and ritual that you wrote in Freemasonry. Those rituals that you just mentioned, how much religion, culture, politics, and again, personal interest, the reason why Freemasons fall from each other, how much those shaped and changed the purpose of those rituals?
Well, I mean, one thing that was specific to Delinto's rituals was the Christian elements, because it's very Christian, and obviously it's got the Rose Croix in there, version of the Rose Croix, and he mentions about the sacrifice of Christ, and the parallels between the sacrifice of Hiram Abiff to the sacrifice of Christ, and later on the sacrifice of Jacques de Molay. You know, so it's very, very Christian. It's very Templar orientated, chivalric. It's got a chivalric essence to it. So yeah, there's real rich Christian themes going on there. Yeah, it's a beautiful rite, really. I mean, I've never really delved into something like that before. I mean, obviously, with the I'm not a member of the Knights Templar now, you know, as it is today. You know, I've never ventured that far. But obviously, you know, it's very Christian, and it's got these beautiful elements in there. You know, these beautiful poetic elements as well. So yeah, you know, it's. I think Delinto obviously had his own input into these and changed these over time, because he was the leading guy.
Correct.
So his personality has seeped into them at some stage. Obviously, we can't say when and where for sure, but it's obvious that if
it's human, there's something like this.
Yeah. It's human nature that with Delinto being in charge of these for so long, probably nearly 40 years or whatever, his personality has, you know, seeped into the rituals. He's changed them over time. He's adjusted them, you know.
Makes sense.
Yeah, the personality goes in there. Obviously, the Christian essence of the time. And what was interesting as well, I wrote a little piece about this in the book, that we mentioned the Enlightenment before. It was the Age of Enlightenment, and that kind of triggers a few things, because there's a lot of writers in the past, like Roy Porter, for example. He's mentioned that you know, people were, you know, began to be suspicious of Christianity and suspicious of the church, you know, because of the Enlightenment. But what the rite of 7 degrees enabled really was it was attracting intellectuals. It was attracting people from universities. There was various different professors joining and things like that, you know, which is very interesting, because these people were obviously, you know, great thinkers. You know, they were university lecturers and authors and things like that. They joined, so they could balance the the spirituality that was going on there, that essence of spirituality, the pathway that was provided for them, and on the other hand, they could still respect the enlightenment and the intellectual side. So there was a blend going on there, which in Freemasonry, that has occurred. With going back to Jean Theophilus Desaguliers. I mean, he was a church minister. He was a minister, and he was a scientist. So he could easily balance that essence of religion that he believed in, and also the scientific interests that he had.
Desaguliers was a Huguenot, so a religious group within Christianity that was persecuted in France and basically terminated until when they left.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he was a disciple of Newton, and he was a researcher, like you're saying.
That's right. That's right. And the same thing happened with
Delinto.
Delinto. Yeah, I mean, the way that he kind of had his right all laid out, the pathway and the engravings, and the journey that the Freemason would actually, and there's lots of references to alchemy and things like that, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
So there was a lot going on in his right, really.
So Desaguliers had Newton as this, figure that was everybody was just looking at and following. Did Delinto had also a inspiring figure in his time, similar to what Newton was for Desaguliers?
I'm not sure that Delinto seems to be coming from a French culture, French background. He was very much associated with the military aspect of things. And I think it was the Duke of Clermont was involved, the Baron de Bissy, names like that, so he was very much associated with the lower end of French aristocracy and the military aspect of things. But his use of the Kadosh ritual at the end, and the mention of the sacrifice of Jacques de Molay was has been suggested by French Masonic writers like Pierre Mollier, that there was a bit of a rebellion going on there, that there was an essence of French politics kind of drifting in there, because obviously they wanted change, they wanted social change. So it appears that Delinto may have had ideas of social change, and there are elements in his engravings that link tenuously to William Blake's work. And obviously William Blake was an advocate for social change and political change as well. So yeah, there's things like that I've discussed in the book as well, which is interesting. Obviously we're at the age of revolution here, the French Revolution, 1789, so.
I would like to provoke you with the last part of the last question, David. Part of my question was, can you give me a sentence about why anybody should buy this book? I think you gave me, half of the interview. It's just fascinating the way that you bring it forward. So thank you for already that part. But I have a question. Do I buy, or anybody should buy your book for your book? Or, like you just said, this is the completion of a larger work where the three books together will actually help anybody to really get into those characters, those elements of Freemasonry, those events that shaped who we are today.
Yeah, well, I like to see all of my work. Really is. I mean, I've written 12 books now. This is my 12th book, and I'd like to see all the work really has these similar threads running through them, these themes running through them. Masonic characters, some good, some not so good. Maybe some that were Masons, some that weren't Masons, but were kind of fixated with Freemasonry in some way, like Richard Carlisle. I mean, he made a bit of a side career, from his Manual of Freemasonry, and the radicalism, because there's a lot of radicalism, in this period and within Freemasonry as well. There's some radical voices going on there. There's, but yeah, strong characters, social change, esoteric spirituality, that search, that pathway that people wanted to find. They wanted to find themselves. They wanted to help the world, make the world a better place. And this is needed now, really. I mean, we're drifting onto politics, but we've seen that we're in a bit of a mess in the Western world, the United States and Britain. What's needed is to make the world a better place, to save the world, to make it a better place. And I think Freemasonry could be used for that. Really, it could be offered as a spiritual pathway, as a way of kind of discovering oneself. So when it comes to buying books, I mean, I see my books not only as like these educational books that people do, but academic books, but also books that have a story and tell a story. And I think that's vital, really. And they all kind of link together. Some of my books do mention a few things that I've written about, and so they all kind of work together in a way, I like to think that people read them, get something out of them.
They do. I can tell you my own experience. It's a great learning experience. Likewise, in preparation to today, I had the opportunity to go through your material, and it was like, yeah, in Italy we say just take a cherish, and then the next one comes, and the next one comes. I mean, every pearl that you write down, every information about any character is actually very intriguing. The way that you bring forward your writing, it's something that I truly enjoyed during these last few days in preparation to today. So thank you very much, David.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for that.